Well, I don't know. They hadn't been in my office in a while.
I spoke with Texas Republican Representative Jeb Hensarling, who is fuming mad over the Fannie and Freddie sponsored parties. Here's what he had to say. I appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here.
I appreciate it. Well, you know, this takes the cake in terms of chutzpah for two companies, Fannie and Freddie, that claim to be really poor, need the taxpayer to bail them out, for them to initiate this party for lawmakers to celebrate the bailout. What do you make of it?
Well, clearly they have a lot to celebrate. They just got an open-ended, a blank check from the U.S. Treasury out of the United States Congress, so I can see why they would want to throw a party. I mean, if bad came to worse, the taxpayer just signed up for $5 trillion of extra liability to bail out two private companies.
Well, you know what makes us so angry here at SCORE? It's the taxpayers didn't sign willfully to this. In fact, when polled, most people are against a bailout of this sort. So where is the popular will for this move?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Fannie and Freddie claim they didn't ask for the help. Their regulator claims they don't need the help, but I'm sure they will willingly accept the help and all the other special privileges they get for being so-called government-sponsored enterprises. But wouldn't we all love to be able to essentially privatize our profits and socialize our losses, which is exactly what was done here in this unparalleled move. And where does it stop? All of a sudden, if you're big enough, if you're interconnected enough, if you spend enough money on lobbyists in Washington, you too can get a government bailout. Well, and that's the message Congress is sending.
Exactly, and it's that last piece of the equation that is most bothersome, most loathsome, really, the fact that they've spent hundreds of millions, if we're to believe Senator DeMint, over the past 10 years in lobbying Congress for exactly this kind of a bailout.
Well, David, it's public record. They've spent almost $200 million in lobbying fees over the last 10 years. Anybody in Washington knows that they've had the crackjack lobbying team, and I guess maybe they're getting bonuses and they get to go to parties because they just arranged an open-ended blank check of the U.S. Treasury paid for by the U.S. taxpayer.
Well, is this party the party that they were planning to throw? By the way, I guess they've taken their names off of the invitation. You won't see their names up there, but they're still putting money into the party. Is that the way they lobby, and exactly how else do they schmooze with Congress to get what they want?
Well, I don't know. They hadn't been in my office in a while. And listen, I don't want to tar and feather everybody with the company, but you've had executives taking taxpayer privileges, getting multi-million-dollar bonuses, many of whom cooked the books. That's been proven by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They had to pay fines. They cooked the books. And so to sit here and think that, one, they're throwing this party when supposedly they're on the precipice of financial ruin, I guess, thank a bunch of members of Congress for helping them out is really beyond the pale.
It is beyond the pale. But by the way, you got one of the questions is how bad off are they? For years, they were claiming they weren't bad off, and now we're hearing that despite the bailout, essentially they have their books in orders. But today, you got the president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, Tim Geithner, to actually admit that they are in trouble.
Well, absolutely. And what's important for people to realize, and what I said before is, maybe Fannie and Freddie are too big to fail today, but shame on us if we allow them to be too big to fail tomorrow. One of two things has to happen, in my opinion. Either, number one, they have to be put in a smaller sandbox and broken up like AT&T was. Again, they get special government privileges that nobody else gets. Or my preferred method is, over a reasonable period of time, take away their government privileges, let them be totally private companies, compete in the marketplace like everybody else. And the head of the Federal Reserve in New York said, yes, something has to be done. The current status quo cannot be maintained without repeating what we're seeing here today.
But why is a guy from the private sector like Hank Paulson, Treasury Secretary, instead of accepting a private sector solution such as the one you mentioned, going for more federal bailout?
Well, I don't know. I'm disappointed. I understand that he was given several lousy options. But again, it doesn't do us any good to solve the problem today if Fannie and Freddie come back 3 years from now with even a bigger tab. In fact, this bill makes matters worse. I mean, the Washington Post, not exactly a bastion of conservative thought, editorialized last week that this package means we are even more likely to have to bail them out in the future. So I can't speak for the Secretary of Treasury, but I'm disappointed in the plan.
Well, and while the Secretary of the Treasury says that they are going to stay in their current form, to use his phrase, you have Tim Geithner saying that the current balance is probably untenable over the longer term. So there's a disagreement among these policymakers, even among those who want to bail out of Freddie, Fannie, as to whether they are solvable or not.
In their current form, the status quo is unsustainable. If that's really what the Secretary of Treasury believes, and I know he has to use his public words guardedly, but if that's truly what he believes, he is simply wrong. They are unsustainable. You cannot have something that's neither fish nor fowl. These are financial Frankensteins that are now going to gobble up their creator. I mean, these are not creatures of a organic competitive marketplace. They're creatures that have been granted special monopoly privileges. They've abused those privileges and created huge systemic risks for our economy. They either have to be privatized or broken up.
All right. Well, we have to wrap it, but I'm just going to ask you, despite the current bailout, will they be privatized, yes or no, eventually?
Oh, eventually, I believe they will. And I think today you've seen the first crack in the dam.
Okay. Congressman, thank you very much for coming on Scoreboard. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right.